Born in 1923, my grandfather Bruce Murray Wharton was a child of the Great Depression in working-class Sydney. He adored his mother but despised his father, and as a young teen decided to run away to sea. He joined the Merchant Navy only to be swept up in the turmoil of World War II. He survived an air raid in England that threw him 3 meters into the air, and then left on a supply ship bound for Egypt. It proved to be a good choice, as the other 2 vessels he was offered positions on were both sunk at sea en route to Russia, with all hands lost. His ship too, however, was sunk, shot down by a German raider. Finding himself in the freezing cold ocean, he was suffering from acid burns, shrapnel wounds, and a bullet straight through his upper arm from the gunners who were shooting off the German raider. They weren't shooting at him, they were shooting at the sharks circling him in the water. He credited the German captain and the ship's doctor with saving his life, and he spent the next 6 months on the ship, sailing the world with them, helplessly watching as they sunk Allied ship after Allied ship, even mining the waters of Sydney Harbour. He was offered safe passage on a Japanese vessel that refueled them in the middle of the ocean, but he and a fellow American POW declined, even though Japan was technically neutral at the time. Pearl Harbor happened a short time later. Another good choice. Eventually, he found himself back in Europe and was transferred from France to Milag Nord in northern Germany, where he spent the next 3 years of his life in the POW camp. He was absent on 2 occasions, however, when he escaped, and on his second recapture, he found himself more often than not in solitary confinement. It was a harsh life in the POW camp, as I'm sure you can imagine, but he was treated humanely. He learnt fluent French and German in his time there, won the camp boxing championship, and learned to slice the thinnest bread you have ever seen, which meant he was given that great responsibility in his time there for the camp. As war was coming to an end, his 3rd and final attempt at escape was successful. He and 3 other fellow POWs cut through a wire fence, escaped, found a Mercedes and drove to freedom, to a liberated town nearby. When they were stopped at gunpoint by American forces, they responded in broad Australian and New Zealand accents, were immediately welcomed and repatriated on a Lancaster back to England. While my grandfather had some Hollywood blockbuster highlights in his wartime experiences, he never shared much about them, and then only shared a little about them later in life. And like many war testimonies and stories, it's full of lest we forget moments, monuments that point to remembrance. And as a granddaughter, I am so thankful for those lest we forget moments. The tallest monument I have was his faith. I am so grateful for that, and the way that despite all he saw, or perhaps because of all he saw, he knew and trusted in God. I have his memories, I have his wartime journals, and I have family resemblance to point me to my Poppa. And God does the same for us. The Israelites had monuments throughout the Promised Land. The disciples had broken bread and wine to remind them of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And we too have monuments that we can come to help remind us of our faith and the strength we can find in God. Remembering is a biblical kind of thing. Thank you for helping me remember today, lest we forget.